Welcome to Feminist Question Time, brought to you by Women's Declaration International, the leading global organisation defending women's sex-based rights against the threats posed by gender identity ideology. There's more information on the website womensdeclaration.com, where you'll find our declaration on women's sex-based rights, which has been signed by 34,851 people from 161 countries and is supported by 491 organisations from all over the world. We have over 100 volunteer activists and 53 country contacts engaged in defending women's rights. Following the rampant display of male violence against women in Auckland, New Zealand, Women's Declaration International would like to express our solidarity with those who were attacked while speaking, and about the well-being and safety of women and children, and the importance of women-only spaces. Article 4 of the Declaration of Women's Sex-Based Rights affirms that women have the right to hold opinions without interference. This should include the right to hold and express opinions about gender identity without being subject to harassment, prosecution, or punishment. These attacks are a blatant act of women-hating and of utter contempt for the right to freedom of expression. We are also concerned by the response of the police, who could have done much more to protect women. We call on the New Zealand authorities to condemn these horrifying attacks and to ensure that women are able to voice their concerns without having to risk their lives. So I'm really pleased to welcome our guests. We've got Kim Jones and later her daughter, Swim Mom, 1 year on. So she'll be telling us about a year from when she spoke to us before, what's happening in terms of swimming and women's sex-based rights and athletics. That will be first, and after that we'll have a question and answer session straight away because she has to leave and catch a flight. Then we're going to have Elisa from Il Mondo Nuovo from Italy, the rise of gender ideology in Italy. Then we're going to hear from Jess De Wahls from the UK, artist activist, and that's another 1 year on or thereabouts. So we'll recap on her story and what's been happening in the last year. And then we have Andrea Nobre, who is an activist and an author, and will be telling us about her new publication and her activities. I'd like to now go to our first speaker, who is Kim Jones. So Kim Jones, she has become, after last year, she spoke to us, and if you were here or you saw the videos, the recording, she spoke to us voice only, and we also altered her voice, and it made a massive impact. So we got, I think, over 20,000 views or near 20,000 views. I think it was a game changer. It was really significant that Kim, thank you so much for speaking to us and standing up. She's now become a full-time advocate for female athletes and women's sex-based rights, and she's going to tell us about what's happened in the last year and where Kim is headed. So thank you so much for coming, Kim. It's lovely to see you, and I'm going to hand over to you.
I can't believe that it's been a year since I spoke with you all about witnessing the injustice of a single male swimmer in women's swimming. It's still hard to reflect back and rationalize that that was a real-life experience, and that so much of the nightmare continues on. My heart breaks for the women and girls who have been hurt by these policies and who will continue to be hurt until we turn this all the way around. Unfortunately, I now hear more of these stories every week from angry and tearful women and parents. I know that we are just scratching the surface of the true toll. So while last year I was hoping to offer a glimpse into what I had seen, my message for today is twofold. First, to look back and gauge just how much has happened in a single year. And second, to offer hope and encouragement to anyone listening. That we are living in an era when men have the backing of law to call themselves women and to self-impose their desires on society at the expense of women. It's hard for me to wrap my head around still. But I want to reassure you all, it's only going to take one thing to change this: speaking. I am so glad that I was given the opportunity and encouraged to do just that by Kara Dansky, in spite of my nerves, and I hope that I can encourage other women to find their voice. Speaking up for what you believe in is the best feeling in the world. It is absolutely liberating. Women feeling shackled to silence through social or financial intimidation is abuse, and it is a way to keep us from achieving equality, or for that matter, even from discussing our lives. Our voices are our power, and using them allows us to explore, to think, to learn, to grow, and to change the world for the better. Nothing should stand in the way of letting us do this. When we speak about our experiences, we make visible the otherwise invisible, and the next generation of women need to see the examples of women speaking unabashedly. So with that, what's happened in a year in sports? It was February of last year when I spoke on here. The world at that time felt intensely dark to me. I honestly didn't know how I would share without losing my ability to speak through the overwhelming emotion. It was traumatic as women learn how, it was very traumatic as a woman to learn how we were being redefined and silenced. But even more so as a mother with that fierce instinct to protect when you see men so easily justify abuse and public humiliation of our daughters. After uncovering the deep roots of gender ideology, how deeply they were ingrained into our society, I felt like I had this dreaded superpower of knowing what was coming time and time again, but being stripped of any ability to stop it. I know I speak for so many of us because I have heard it with every group I have spoken with since, and the questions are all the same. What can I do? I felt so powerless, but this, I think, is the greatest lesson of last year. I fought really hard to find some path forward, some foothold through my voice, and I no longer cared what it cost. It was too important. Every day, I woke up thinking, if I can just do two things, if I can have two conversations today, take those steps, however small they are, I will feel better and I will start something. And guess what I learned? For every person afraid to talk to you or who disagrees, there are 100 who are absolutely hungry for someone to speak the truth or just to share. After NCAAs, a few brave souls spoke up, like the amazing Riley Gaines and teams of women who were alums of historically dominant swimming programs. Through all of the channels of conversations that had opened up, I was connected to a woman named Marcy Smith, and in her, I found another person as determined as I was. We decided to gather the troops a month and a half later after speaking in Las Vegas last summer and officially launched the organization we'd been missing for women in sport, an advocacy group, a place to turn, and a network of support so no female athletes would be left stranded again facing sex-based discrimination. Icons was born, and it's the Independent Council on Women's Sports. We've since written as many op-eds as our hands could write, spoken to every news outlet that will hear us, regardless of political persuasion. And I know some of you might not agree with that, but our thoughts are that every ear reached is helpful and there will be women listening everywhere. We have reached out incessantly to politicians, gathered lawyers, laid out plans of action for the next years, found experts in fields that sports depend on, from business to infrastructure and policymakers. We've been connected to some of the fiercest women in sport who are building coalitions within their sports, speaking out fearlessly and utilizing their own networks to educate their communities and put pressure on their governing bodies. They are, in one word, formidable. Organizations like ours are popping up all over the world in response to the frustration and discrimination women see. And we've linked forces by forming an international group, ICFS, the International Consortium on Female Sport, where we've clarified our language and our positions to be consistent around the world. We've unified and opened up our paths of communication. We are connecting the absolute legends in each sport around the world. We've held rallies. We've worked to support changes in several policies to protect female athletes. We've acted as a resource for athletes, media, news, and governing bodies. We've delivered a legal demand letter to the NCAA, and we intend to follow through, holding them accountable for their blatant discrimination. We've helped to organize legal briefs for cases working their way through the courts. And just 2 weeks ago, we helped to get a brief to the Supreme Court expressing the emotional and psychological toll on female athletes when they face discrimination on the basis of sex. That was the first message from women to the Supreme Court in the United States regarding the damage women face from gender ideology and telling their personal stories. We have done all this with only our own pockets and our own time. Just last week, we received our nonprofit status, and I cannot wait to see what we will do now. This last year, the shift has been dramatic. Swimming came face to face with the undeniable reality of sex, televised for every eye to see. They had to act. World Aquatics took a step to protect the women's category by protecting elite women's competition from male athletes who've experienced puberty. World Boxing later in this year recognized sex as well. Several governing bodies in the UK have stepped up. And just 2 days ago, World Athletics, the governing body of track and field and the largest and possibly most influential of the governing bodies in the IOC, that's the International Olympic Committee, followed the policy of World Aquatics. People unafraid to talk is what is making this happen. The momentum is good, but there have been disappointments. I'm not going to focus on those today. The biggest concerns I have going forward are, first, these policies do not nearly go far enough, and we need them adopted worldwide across all sports where sex classification should exist. Second, we need the governing bodies to recognize women as a sex class. We don't become female at puberty. And a man that somehow stops his puberty does not ever go through anything remotely like female puberty. Third, we need policies that are adopted all the way down to the youngest girls in competition. The mantra must be that women do not need to become elite in order to deserve respect and fair competition. No males in women's sports, no exceptions. The problem now will be what it always is for women, that the young girls and the women not at the Olympic and professional levels are less visible, and we are going to have to be fierce for them. I have been saying this from the beginning, that sport is the most public arena of the physical difference between the sexes. In something so public, it cannot be difficult for us to say that women deserve the right to be called champions and to celebrate their completely independent and incomparable physical limits. We will win this fight in this public arena, and this will be an assertion of the biological reality we live with. But the fights in the quieter corners are more easily hidden. The locker rooms and restrooms, which we depend on for dignity and privacy, for protection and for a barrier. Those must be recognized for women to have access to sport and to be active participants in society. For those of you fighting in the corners of fighting in the corners of women in prisons, in crisis shelters, hospitals, in science or data collection, or in just standing up for the rights of women, including lesbians, in their personal relationships and gatherings, to recognize the reality of sex, keep going. We are only as visible as the women willing to speak up. To wrap up, we all have a role in this, and I don't ever want to compel any woman's speech. But if you want to speak up or feel like inspired to, I want to encourage you to cross that Rubicon. You will not regret it. Dream big, find a friend, as I have found in Marshy, and help each other to build something. Run for school board, run for office. Who cares if you lose if you bring the right conversations forward? Organize a group, talk to your company, express your concerns with policy, write to your politicians, better yet, go knock or even sit down in front of their doors until they'll speak with you. Ladies, my encouragement to you is let's just be relentless.
We're going to go on to our next speaker now, who is Elisa from Il Mondo Nuovo 2.0. And she's going to talk about the rise of gender identity ideology, or the gender ideology. She's from Italy. And thank you so much for speaking to us today. So over to you, Elisa.
So my name is Elisa, and I am an Italian 30-year-old woman. And I have been studying gender ideology for years now. And to fight the worrying rise of this ideology in my country, I sort of became a content creator and public speaker. In December of 2022, I started a YouTube channel that I named Il Mondo Nuovo 2.0, that is Brave New World 2.0, from the title of Aldous Huxley's dystopia. And I think that everyone here who is familiar with gender identity ideology knows how deeply dystopian some parts of it look. So when we hear prominent public figures talk about pregnant people and people with uteruses, it looks dystopic. When we see grown men taking opportunities away from women in sports, as we've heard, with people, especially young women, defending them, it looks very dystopic. And when we say women are adult human females and we get called transphobic and haters and fascists, it looks very, very dystopic. And I could go on and on and on. So over the past few years, I have followed thoroughly and with great worry how this harmful ideology has been spreading in the UK, in the US, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Europe, and so on. And so I know how trans activists behave. I know how they manage to infiltrate universities, schools, policy, and law. I know how easily well-meaning people give in to their demands, falling for the victim rhetoric and thinking this is a matter of defending the rights of the marginalized. So when I started noticing how the mainstream media in my country started to push the same exact narrative more and more often, I decided that I had to do something. So in this speech, I will briefly talk about the current state of affairs of gender ideology in Italy, because we are still at very early stages as far as public opinion is concerned. Because the overwhelming majority of Italian people have got absolutely no clue that this ideology even exists. In fact, if you say the words gender ideology, you'll most likely get called a conspiracy theorist and get laughed at. So the current mantra is gender ideology doesn't exist. Especially in left and center-left leaning people and groups. They say it's an invention of the religious right, of the Catholics, of the Vatican, and of the fascists. 90%, and I'm being fairly optimistic, of Italians don't even know the difference between sexual orientation and the made-up concept of gender identity. So they simply conflate the two. And when people like me try to speak up against gender identity ideology, they will get accused of being backward bigots that want gay people to get beaten up on the streets. So for the vast, vast majority of Italian people, gender ideology is a non-existent issue. Meanwhile, however, the ideology is spreading in public schools and universities through specific education guidelines which influence curricula, and especially through external projects. So we have speakers from LGBT+ organizations indoctrinate children and adolescents this way. So by coming to talk to the students about inclusion and human rights, about bullying and discrimination of the marginalized, they will talk about the acceptance of the true self, etc., etc. And they explain to our kids that sex is assigned at birth and that gender identity, aka the gendered soul, can be detached from it. So they teach our youth to conflate biological sex with the adherence to rigid sex stereotypes. And this is not only in schools, of course, because young people in my country consume a lot of Netflix, a lot of YouTube, and a lot of TikTok. So they are inevitably exposed to content regarding trans, non-binary, LGBT plus stuff, and so on. Italian mainstream media have also begun to aggressively push this kind of propaganda, celebrating self-ID in schools, genderless bathrooms, young people who identify as trans and non-binary, and so on. And whoever tries to raise any doubts is labeled as a right-wing fascist bigot, some kind of monster who doesn't care if people suffer and kill themselves. Because we all know that the suicide narrative is the trans activists' strongest suit, and things are no different in my country. So from the beginning of 2023, the mainstream propaganda focused aggressively on puberty blockers for children. So we have articles and posts about these life-saving drugs, about how you can deny these poor children their healthcare, about bullying and discrimination, and about the high risk of suicide. So blockers are presented as the only way to survive if you feel as you were born in the wrong body. Yes, because the narrative here is still focused around the notion of quote unquote being born in the wrong body. A narrative that we know that trans activism has rejected long ago. But it's too early, I repeat, for Italian public opinion to begin pushing the idea of quote unquote, you don't need gender dysphoria to be trans. So the main propaganda tactic at the moment is to emphasize the great pain and suffering of these poor children who need their life-saving puberty blockers to survive the imminent suicide. You have to know that off-label use of puberty blockers for dysphoric children has been authorized in Italy only in 2019. Pediatricians and endocrinologists can prescribe these drugs to children if they have a diagnosis of gender dysphoria, which is relatively easy to get if you know where to go. More and more psychologists and therapists are adopting the affirmation approach. Many parents have told me that their children were immediately affirmed in their identity by the professional, whose only job seemed to be helping kids transition. Of course, luckily, not every mental health professional in my country follows these guidelines, but a lot of them do, especially if you take your children to one of these quote unquote gender variance centers, which are basically gender clinics funded by the state. So as I said earlier, blockers are prescribed by pediatricians and endocrinologists. And what do you know? The Italian associations of pediatricians and endocrinologists were the first to jump on their seats and raise their voice when a couple of months ago, the president of the Italian Psychoanalysts Association, Saranti Stanopoulos, wrote a public letter to our Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni. In the letter, he said they were very worried about the use of puberty blockers on dysphoric minors, and he called for a serious scientific discussion on the matter. The endocrinologists and pediatricians were very quick to respond to this. They publicly said that Stanopoulos was unnecessarily scaring people and that these drugs were absolutely essential to these suffering children. But it is interesting to notice that in their statements, they claim that the kids' dysphoria is not a mental illness itself, but that it comes from the stigma and the discrimination they suffer by people who do not validate their gender identity in society. So these medical professionals are stating ideological dogmatic concepts like gender identity and sex assigned at birth, following WPATH and APA's guidelines on affirmation. Back in August 2022, the Italian Pediatrics Association released a specific statement on gender affirmation in children, where mental health care is called gatekeeping and an actual form of transphobia. These are the literal words from the statement. And the mental health professionals who don't affirm right away are said to deny these children their human right to gender affirming care and to self-determination. So you see, Italy is following the script step by step without changing much. Now let's get to who is fighting all of this, because we are not many in my country. As I said before, 90% of Italian people know absolutely nothing about this. They don't know what gender ideology is. They don't know about kids transitioning, about the transitioner, about men in women's sports and prisons. They don't know about the dehumanizing language being imposed on women, such as menstruators, cis, uterus havers, and so on. They don't know about autogynephilia, and they still picture a quote-unquote trans woman like some kind of drag queen, prostitute, or whatever. And most importantly, the majority of people still conflate transgender with homosexual. So as I said, there are very few voices that are actively challenging this narrative. And the opposition is always the same. You have radical feminists on one side and the religious conservatives on the other. So Italian radical feminists are very focused on this issue and are trying to spread as many information as possible on gender identity ideology with decent journalism, which is sadly something that we really lack in our country. In the website Feminist Post, they raise awareness about gender ideology with a lot of news from abroad, which are not reported by anyone else. And a similar kind of job is being done by pro-life and pro-family Catholic charities, who have been warning people about the dangers of gender ideology for many, many years, but nobody listened to them because they were mocked and called bigots. But they called out children's indoctrination in schools years ago. I remember it, but back then I thought they were lunatic bigots too. I just thought that they were teaching little boys that they could play with dolls, and they were teaching little girls that they could do sports or science or whatever. But of course I was wrong. Then we have a lesbian charity, Arcilesbica, that opposes gender ideology. This group of lesbian women have been ostracized by the rest of LGBT activism because of their stance on sex work and surrogacy, which they denounce as exploitation and commodification of women's bodies. And for this, a few years ago, they have literally been kicked out of their historical headquarters at Bologna's LGBT center. Then there are a couple of independent transsexual voices against self-ID and children transitioning, all M2Fs who have distanced themselves from the LGBT community or have been pushed away for their dissenting opinions. I have interviewed a couple of these transsexuals and they vocally oppose the mainstream narrative on gender. Recently, the opposition has been joined by a newborn association of ROGD parents, Generazione D, D generation. Roughly 90% of them are parents to teenage or young adult daughters, confirming the trend that we see in the rest of the world. So we have left-wing feminists and lesbians on one side, and the religious right on the other side. And we know, sadly, that these two groups do not get along very well. But I fear that if we keep on focusing on ideological and political differences, we won't succeed in stopping the spread of this ideology in my country, because it is spreading really fast, especially in schools, and kids have no counter-argument to listen to. They have institutions and professionals telling them that we all have a gendered soul and that they can change their identity whenever they feel like it. They are being told that if you like pink, then you must be a girl. So if you don't like it, you're most probably a boy. I already hear from many teachers telling me that more and more teenage girls are coming out as trans and non-binary, and they want to be called male names and addressed to with male pronouns in the classroom. And the teachers go along with it, either because their school's policy involves self-ID, which is called here carriera alias, or because they simply don't want to be labeled as backwards and bigots and haters and so on. So if kids and young adults follow mainstream media and mainstream influencers, they are exposed to endless indoctrination. If a kid then develops doubts about their identity, what do the concerned parents do? They turn to associations of parents of LGBT children, which are more activist groups than support groups, kind of like mermaids. And they all support affirmation-only approach. These groups will certainly lead parents to the quote-unquote gender centers or to trusted therapists, and they will fall down the social transition route. Just a couple of days ago, I spoke on the phone for 2 hours with one of these moms who is now opposed to gender ideology, but who at the beginning was an affirming parent. And she told me that herself. I affirmed my daughter because I didn't know what else to do. They all told me it was the best thing I could do for her. And her story is being shared now by too many in my country, and nobody knows about it. The voices of these parents calling out the danger of affirmation and the reality of kids being fast-tracked to transition in our country have recently made it on national TV, but at midnight in a right-wing political talk show. And the same talk show has interviewed an Italian detransitioner, a young man of 27 who has surgically altered his genitals forever. But the next day, nobody talked about it. It didn't make the news. No articles on mainstream media, no debate, nothing. Nobody is listening. I'll conclude by saying that in 3 months, I will give birth to a little girl, and I really don't want her to grow up in a world where she will be told that a woman is nothing more than an idea in a man's head, that she's a uterus haver and she's a menstruating person. I don't want her to share private spaces with males, and I don't want her to give up doing sports because a man will win anyway. I don't want her school and the media she consumes to tell her she's a bigot and a TERF if she doesn't believe in gender identity ideology. And most of all, I definitely don't want her to think she's a man if she likes to have short hair and wear baggy clothing. And in general, I don't want her to live in a world where objective truth is being denied and people are forced to lie about basic reality. In conclusion, I think we have a little advantage here in Italy because we came late. So being late, we can look back at what happened in other countries and learn from those mistakes. But I'm seeing this madness unfold before my eyes, following the exact steps that it took abroad. And I think that at this point, the only way to stop it is to educate people on the topic. And those who know have to forget about left and right and start to get together to say that men are men and women are women, which is a simple, plain truth, but the greatest heresy for the believers in gender ideology. It must be said loud and it must be said clear. And the more we tell it, the more chances we'll have to prevent irreversible damage. Thank you.
We're going to go to is Jess De Wahls. So Jess De Wahls is a very well-known artist in Britain who famously was cancelled, is very, very celebrated in Britain, and then actually said things about women being adult human females and didn't back down and got into all sorts of trouble. So we're really lucky to have you on, Jess. So this is Jess's website, and you can see what some of the fantastic work she does. How would you describe your work, Jess?
Well, I mean, I'm an embroidery artist, and well, it's always my subject matter has always been around feminism, female-centric things that I sort of was exploring. And then suddenly gender identity ideology and subsequently fetishism, because I think that's very closely linked and lots of people don't talk about it enough. Yeah, so it's embroidery first and foremost.
And what happened for the women who don't know?
The massive thing happened not last year, the year before now. God, time flies. But the initial upset happened when in 2019 I wrote a blog after noticing around me people starting to sound more and more dogmatic. I was, at the time, I still had like a little hair salon inside of Soho Theatre, and and the way that people were talking around me just started to sound a bit nuts, quite frankly. And because I've worked there for such a long time, I had the advantage of just having normal conversations with people without being, labeled immediately, oh God, you bigot, like, I just, can you tell me what you mean? What do you mean this is transphobic? And then they were talking and then it just sounded more and more nuts. And and so the more I had those conversations, the more I thought, this is unreal. This is crackers. And I've been like sort of card-carrying member of Lib Fems probably beforehand, and was so immersed in that whole world and sort of London's fetish scene and stuff like that as well, that I just didn't see it, like I was just like, oh, live and let live. What's it, what's the big deal? Until I mean, when you're in the center of it and you still start to notice that people start sounding nuts, they have to sound really quite nuts.
Yeah.
And so the more I looked into that, the more I just fell down this rabbit hole of ideology and thought, oh my days, what the hell is going on? So wrote a blog, which initially was something like 7,500 words, which my husband edited, I think 5 times. Great test for a relationship. Because he started.
So once you found out and you started thinking this is mad, you already probably had read a lot, and then you thought the way you're going to order your thoughts but also share them is this blog.
Because I stitched a piece, like an embroidery piece called Somewhere Over the Rainbow, Something Went Terribly Wrong. And it was the first time, because usually I just I make my art, I put it out there, And then I tend to just leave it to the viewer what they want to make of it. But this felt like something completely different. And I felt like my way of communicating what I feel about what's going on and stuff is my work. But that didn't feel enough. It felt so balloony, and people seemed to be so not aware that I felt like I need to write this. And also because the more I dug into it, the more I saw women who expressed exactly the same worries as I saw creeping up. And there's my blog. and so yeah, so I thought, I need to say something. I can't sit here, see them getting battered in public, because I'm quite outspoken anyways. And it just felt wrong. I just, I didn't have a specific date for when it had to be ready, but like I said, the blog had to be edited 5 times, because when I started writing it, it was very angry, like really angry, because I just couldn't quite believe what I was finding, what I was unearthing, and it just was horrible. And then I came to that point and I published it, and it all went completely crazy in my small world at that point. And in the embroidery world, apparently I caused a transphobic rapture. Got disavowed from anybody who was basically scared to be associated with me in any way. There were very few voices at that point in 2019 who dared stick in their head about the,
And was it that you were in maybe not the National Gallery, but you were in the shop
that
in the
happened
British
2 years
Museum
later.
Or something? Yeah, go on, carry on then.
That happened 2 years later. But this was the initial thing that then led to, this was in 2019, which led to the public pressure on the theater getting so big that I had to leave. Because, it's a queer space, and to harbor a transphobe, et cetera, et cetera. So I had to leave, but then COVID happened. And so I was already working from home, and then turns out there's lots of sort of secret TERFs who started to commission me, and so I sort of still had work, but I could no longer do anything publicly together with anyone. I couldn't do any collaborations, because as much as my detractors tried to shut me up and didn't, succeed, they then went to whoever I worked with and went, how do you associate with this transphobe? Da, 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 da. So then I basically kept my mouth shut about most things that I was doing publicly, including the fact that the Royal Academy stocked my embroidery patches. And because I had this, I accumulated this little hate fan club who just had an eye on everything I did. So I became much quieter on social media, had my Patreon started, so I would share more there than on Instagram, which is where initially a lot of my art kind of got sort of prominent. And then one fateful night out, 2 years after I had written that blog, with too much alcohol, and then the next day didn't think too closely what I was sharing on Patreon, and sort of had as an aside mention that I just dropped off my patches at the Royal Academy. And then, because I blocked most of the idiots who've been trying to get to me, for the 2 years prior, I wasn't aware for a good day that there was this avalanche of idiots sort of piling up, trying to get me cancelled again. I mean, it was just like a continuous cancellation, but they tried to get me out of the Royal Academy. But not just that, actually, they went on my website, and at the time I still had a page which had all my stockists for all my merchandise. So they tagged every stockist on Instagram. One very loud woman who's got 18,000 followers or whatever on Twitter, on Instagram, who basically got her followers. I still have screenshots of that, because I actually went to the police with it, because I just was so disheartened on the day when it happened. And I was like, this isn't real. She's in London. Why can't you do something about it? This is insane. She's inciting these people to get me out of work, to smear me publicly, and there's nothing I can do. And basically that's
it's so interesting what really is going on. What have you thought about, or got an idea of what is motivating her to bother? Because you could see why does she actually want to get you out of a job?
I think it's multifold. It depends on who it is. I find specifically when you look in the craft spaces, there's a lot of envious idiots out there who use this. It's like a tribal thing, you know? They see someone who's successful with the thing that they're doing, and they somehow, think this is I guess it's like this, like, oh, if I heckle her, then I'll be known for that, With her specific, I don't know, maybe her husband to be is trans, who gives a, I honestly couldn't care, because until she kept just bothering me for 4 years in a row now, I didn't have a clue who she was. And quite frankly, I don't care. But like, she went on like a day-long rant in her stories, which I screenshotted when people sent them to me, because I had her blocked for ages too, where she's with a coffee cup looking like a complete lunatic going, yes, she's unfortunately very talented, but blah, 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 and goes on. And I'm like, you see it foaming around the mouth, and it's just so pathetic. And anyway, at that point, I still didn't know what happened, because for me, in my world, it was all nice and quiet. I was sitting in the garden working on a commission. And then like a day later, it had gone so massive, because she shared the blog. The Royal Academy got in touch, said, oh, we've been advised by like 8 members of the public have contacted us and said such and such and such and such. And it's like, listen, here's my blog, have a read. You should have actually known this beforehand, because it's been online for 2 years. You approached me, so I would have assumed you would have done your due diligence. Clearly they haven't. Anyway, so, and the first email was still quite friendly from them. And I said to them, it's like, look, I would really appreciate if we wouldn't drag this in the public. This has been going on for 2 years. Can we just not? And then like half a day later, they basically dumped me publicly to their 500,000 followers on Instagram. And there were lots of people who then contacted me saying, are you all right? Is there something we can do? Should we contact the Royal Academy in your defense? I'm like, no, because that's more public mudslinging. Let's not. Let's see what they come back with. And well, they didn't really. They sort of refused. And so I just took a screenshot of what they posted and posted it on Twitter, saying this is where we're at. And then I put my phone aside. And for me, because for me, I was so used to this whole canceling nonsense that I just put it down as another one of those, well, okay, well, then they won't stalk me anymore. Great, move on. Because I'm never going to apologize for what I wrote. And so, but this wasn't that, because it was a Royal Academy. But I did, for me, it was so normal that I didn't clock that this was such a massive thing. And then I woke up to basically the entire UK press in my inbox going, do you want to talk about this? This is like, what's going on? Da, da, da. And because I had been in touch previously, completely unrelated, with Janice Turner from the Times. And she called me in the morning. And with press, is always it's a bit of a two-edged sword. You don't know until you've spoken to a few people. Are they on your side? Are they going to twist your words? What's going to happen? And then, but with her, I trusted her, and she was really keen to talk. So I was like, well, I'll talk to you for sure. And then it was quite hilarious. I mean, the next week was just like a blur, because I was on front pages everywhere in the UK. I had people calling me day and night. I went from one interview to the next, because it very quickly became clear that almost all, except The Guardian, journalists were pretty much completely rooting for me, because, well, I'm sort of the I don't give a fuck person and say it as it is. They thought it was hilarious, and they were just like handing me the microphone. And I thought quite quickly, after the initial, oh my God, what the hell is happening? I thought, okay, well, they want to give me the platform. I'm going to shout, And this was also 2 weeks after Maya Forstadter's win, which was not insignificant for how this whole story turned, I'm sure. Because every time I had an interview, people would go, so are you going to sue them? I'm like, well, I don't know. I wasn't gonna, because like I wasn't a contractor. Like, I was a contractor. I wasn't an employee. This would have, it would have dragged. I kept saying in every interview, I want an apology. I want an apology. This is not right. They owe me an apology, And then, they went in complete lockdown. So their press office shut down, which was hilarious, because I had Janice Turner sitting in front of me, calling them then they are calling me going, oh, there's journalists calling us. I'm like, really now?
As if it's your fault.
Yeah. But this was the thing. I'm like, what do you want me to do? Because they kept going, they didn't apologize. They were like, they just, oh, so this is going really public. I'm like, yeah, I know. I noticed, but you dumped me into this. So like, what do you want me to help you get out of this?
Yeah.
So they completely just shut down. So it just went completely balloony. It went up to the culture secretary and everything. Like, it was just bonkers. And subsequently, at the same time, I sold out everything in my shop, because people were so outraged about it that they went on a shopping spree, which brilliant, because then every time I went on an interview or anything that was live, I would hit that home, and lo and behold, all the people who were so loud-mouthed in advance, they became quieter and quieter, because they realized that every time they speak up against me, I make more money. And that's the last thing they wanted, which was hilarious. So I came out of this really well. And it basically, like a week after it all started, I got an email from the chief from the Royal Academy, from his office, saying he would like to speak to me and to apologize in person, blah, 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 blah. So he did. He apologized. There were lots of people immediately then jumping on, because I think when there's something so polarizing, people want to see blood, and immediately people went like, oh, but that wasn't sincere. And I'm like, I really don't care. I really, honestly, I spoke to the guy. I thought it was sincere at the time. What it was driven by the fear of the public or whatever, I don't really care. The fact that the chief of the Royal Academy actually called me to apologize, to me, is a win. And you're gonna have to accept when there's something that's going right, and not go on and on and on. And it's like, no, but he could have and he should have, and it's like, no. They apologized, they reinstated me, and one of the Royal Academicians, one of them, contacted me while all of this was happening, saying that he was completely dismayed. This is horrific. He only just found out about it. Absolute solidarity. And if there's anything I can do, and blah, blah, blah. And then he last year invited me hilariously, because he was on the committee for the summer exhibition. And they basically said, so basically, if you are one of the judges, you have the prerogative to invite a couple of artists that bypass the selection process. And because he's hilarious and he's fearless, also Scottish guy, he asked me before he even proposed me, because usually they have to put it forward and then people discuss and whatnot. But because of everything that happened, this all went a little bit different. So he basically asked me, he was like, would you do it? I'd completely understand if you don't want anything to do with us anymore, but I feel like they've wronged you and I want to do something for you. Do you want to exhibit there? And I was like, how big can I go? And yeah, I mean, he didn't have an easy ride selling that, in the sense that, they immediately went like, bad idea, terrible idea, and he's like, well, I already asked her. So and knowing what already happened the year before, they weren't going to backtrack. But no, it was great. So I had a massive embroidery hanging in the summer exhibition last year. But
that's fantastic. It's so good, because I think there are quite a few women in this struggle who, when things like this happen, just go, right, fantastic, bring it on. Like Christina Ellingson, who's the WDI Norway country contact, she was being sort of threatened with 3 months in prison for saying something like lesbians don't have penises. And I was thinking, oh, she's going to be so upset. She wasn't. She was going, this is brilliant. It's fantastic. Norwegian prisons are really nice. And how amazing would it be if they sort of show how stupid they are? But it's such a great attitude, and you look really happy. You look like you've just had a great year.
Well, I did. I mean, yeah. So I did, and for me, it's been extremely positive in the long run. And I think for me, it was because it was so noisy that my detractors have pretty much completely shut up out of fear that it could give me any more publicity, because I think what they've learned is that I'm going to go with it. Like, I don't care if it's good or bad, I'm going to run with it, you know?
Yeah.
But so, yeah, and then I had a baby, so
Yeah.
that was my last year, sort of.
And you're a mother, and you can say it. Yeah.
That's, but,
and so you'd say you've got more customers now. You sell more stuff now. It's sort of.
So I have been continuously working on private commissions but even since I wrote the blog, and that's really fortunate because I'm also in like a arty turfy group, and not everybody is as fortunate. In fact, a lot of the women there really struggle. And so, yeah, I'm just frustrated about it. I want to, like, a good friend passed away recently, and she was very passionate about female art in particular, and wanted to support female artists with some stuff she left behind that I'm going to sort of distribute. And it really made me think, like, that there should be something. I mean, I don't know how many of you have seen the Denise Fami crowdfunder who's suing the Arts Council now.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
Which is super important, but it also, with my friend's passing, made me really think we should really, like J.K. Rowling started Bayra's Place, there should be something like a female arts council. And I don't know yet how I'm going to do it because it sounds insane, but I feel like, somebody started an arts council, so somebody can start a female arts council, because I can, support myself. I get, usually once I'm done with a commission, the next one's already lined up. So I'm pretty much busy for the next year. And the one that I'm currently working on is probably gonna be very noisy once it's finished. So I don't have anything to worry about, but I feel like I'm very, very lucky, because there's a lot of other female artists whose voice gets completely shut down. And that's so wrong, because it makes the art just such a stale, place where you can't get anything. Like,
I mean, it really annoys me. I mean, all the creative areas where men are allowed to express all their perversions or whatever, or all that, like those guys that one who dresses as a woman and is on TV the whole time and does art, and that's all very celebrated. Whereas when we express our truth in our lives, which are sort of often much more political and often feminist, if that's shut down, and then often it is shut down by culture and grooming, and then they say, oh, she's not very creative, is she? Or it doesn't seem to be very authentic. She's not really authentic. You think, yeah, we're not authentic because you've just stopped us doing it. And the great thing with you is that you've managed to do it and just hold your ground and be authentic, and then even if other women are still struggling, at least you've done it, so it is a beacon of hope. And it also, hopefully, it will just move everything in that direction, that we can be authentically artists.
I'm working on a solo show, hopefully in about a couple of years, which will have a lot of what's been going on immortalized in really, really big embroideries. And I think a lot of people will be really, really annoyed about it, but I'm sort of beyond the point of canceling, it feels like, because I've been very vocal about my views. I really don't care if people on Instagram like me. I really don't care. Like, the people that matter to me, they're in my life. And beyond that, it's just background noise. And so what is the point? And this was the thing that I kept asking myself before I published the blog, because I knew this wasn't gonna be quiet, because people knew me, so I knew this is gonna rattle many, many feathers. But I felt like there's 0 point continuing to be an artist if I can't use my art to express those things, to work through those things. If I'm not allowed to do that because it might offend people, what is the point? Art should be allowed to offend. You don't have to like it. It should be allowed to, like, free expression in the art is so important. And being German, there's such a history of, not allowing certain things, and specifically like Hitler sort of related. It's literally prosecutable by law, certain things. And I don't agree with that in the sense, like, as ideas, I think they should be pulled out in the open, should be discussed, and should be able to be ridiculed, because just by not allowing them, they don't go away. They go underground, they get stronger, and then we see shit happen like what happened in New Zealand, you know.
Yeah.
And to me, it's counterproductive to not allow these things, because you can't not allow people's thoughts. They will find each other, especially with the internet now, you know, so they should be out in the open. People should discuss them and should, like, rightfully then shut people up, you know.
We're now going to go to our final speaker, who is Andrea Nobre. She is living in Belgium. She is a journalist at QG Feminista and 4W. She's the author of Grumpy Guide to Radical Feminism, and she's written a report on women's sex-based oppression in the 21st century. She's going to tell us about that report and possibly other stuff. So it's so fantastic. You've been on before, and it's lovely to see you, Andrea. So what about this report? Where is it, and what have you got in it?
This report is about, I tried to make a report about the issues affecting women and girls around the world in the last century. But this report, the interesting thing about this, to put in perspective, this is, don't mind the lettering is Portuguese, it's in 8 languages. So this is the Portuguese, this is the Grumpy Guide to Radical Feminism in Portuguese. So this perspective of issues as reported in the media for a decade only. This is only a decade. Imagine if I have gone since, I don't know, the 19th. The scope of this report is charting female oppression around the world, things happening right now. The background of this report was that when I came to Twitter, I was still in the mindset that we had achieved so much. Women can vote, even though Billy Bragg has just said on Twitter that women have won their rights over men. I don't know if you have seen that.
Wow.
Yes, she just said that at the expense of men, you know. So I thought I'm going to make a Twitter thread on issues that used to happen to women and doesn't happen anymore, right? So women used to be forbidden from voting, scold bridles, what is it called? Foot biting, this kind of stuff. And then I made a big mistake. I was talking to women, trying to listen to women as well. That's very important, to talk to other women and to listen to as many women as you can as well. And I did the mistake of saying female genital mutilation. And then I met Hibu Wader, the amazing Hibu Wader, who is fighting against female genital mutilation. And she said to me, Andrea, these are the statistics. And I was like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. Is anyone reporting on this? Because I'm a journalist, so I started collecting issues as reported in news outlets. So this report has issues at least from 2013 to 2023, as reported in news outlets, and it has 3 main sections. It has issues affecting girls, issues affecting adult women, and issues affecting older women. I make some conclusions through how this work. It's just all these news outlets that I collected, not these news stories I collected. They give a sense, they give a real sense of women oppression, not only existing, but they exist, they are global. There are several issues that happened, like no country can escape from have statistics of that. It's obstetric violence, even female genital mutilation happens like in at least 90 countries. So it's a global problem. Domestic violence, femicide, sexual abuse. No country has equal female representation. No country has equal wages for men and women in the same position with the same professional qualifications, you know. So this is another tool for us, as just as like the Grumpy Guide to Radical Feminism, that's meant to be like a lightweight conversation, an introduction to the feminist theory, radical feminism.
This is what the United Nations used to do, is give a global roundup of the sort of situation, and then now they're being they're focusing on specific issues, like, and then quite obfuscating, like gender equality, and then they think that men can become women. So it's really annoying. But this looks as if it's really straightforward information about what's happening in the world.
It's sex-based
really
oppression, regardless of a self-declared gender identity as trans, man, non-binary. I cover many of these issues happening to women who self-declare as trans or non-binary. I cover issues that it's happening to women, regardless of gender identity, men who self-declare as trans, discriminating, I try to make a point as well I try to not use many news stories with very fantasist language, in the pieces I decided to use, I redacted them. So sometimes it may be very difficult to read because it may say like a mother, and then it is like this, the father in the original piece, because I needed to, I wanted to get people to understand that that woman was being oppressed, was being discriminated, even though she identified as trans, she self-declared as trans or non-binary or a unicorn.
And where we can get it from?
In the website, okay. I'm going to make, it's already for free, okay. So you click on that and you have to click in the sentence, free download here. Don't click in buy.
Yeah, okay.
Click in the sentence, free download here, and then you're gonna be able to download it. Download it for free. Send this to your political representatives, send it to head teachers, send it to anyone that you think might be able to understand the plight that women still having, because we are being told that we are not oppressed anymore. And I'm like, really?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Really? This is only 1 decade. So if you'd like to support my work, okay, if you are a little bit short of money, go on the website. The link is in the chat. And if you would like to have like a paperback, you can get it from Amazon, from the website Club de Autores, where you can get as well the Grumpy Guide to Radical Feminism, the Grumpy Guide to Motherhood, another humor book. And then if you want to support me, you can get the paperbacks. But if you feel that is going to add to our work, to explain to people that a gender identity means nothing whatsoever if you are born with female anatomy.
It's so nice of you to make it free. It's just unbelievable, because it means that we can all use it. And so you're suggesting that we get that and we send it to representatives and say,
download the PDF. If you have the chance, have the emails of people who like city councilors, mayors, governors, anyone in a place of authority, but also get this, locally. because it's not like it's written in a very academic language. It's already written in a very clear, direct language, because the bulk of the book is the title of a news story, then a really important bit from the news story, and the references.
It's incredibly well referenced, and then we can, when people say, oh, it doesn't happen anymore, we don't need our special sex-based rights because we're all equal now. You've got, this is it, this is the answer that we just can ping out everywhere.
Yeah, we intend to, we have these Brazilian groups I work with, and we have all the intention to send a copy to our Brazilian government, because they just created a women's department in this new socialist, leftist government with Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva. But then they are all saying things like, we have like the word all in Portuguese, so todas, women, todos, men, and then they want to say todes, for apparently the unicorns and non-binaries. I don't know.
Yes, yeah.
And they're calling us cis, and I'm like, I won't be calling myself or anyone cis. I'm not a cis woman. For God's sake, the word cis was created by a man who was like sympathetic to pedophiles. I'm a child sexual abuse survivor. You have no right. They have no right whatsoever to demand I call myself a cis woman. And besides, cis woman implies that there is such a thing as women born with female anatomy, which is a subcategory of the female class, apparently. And then there are women who are born with male anatomy.
Because of our work and you want to get this out because of the situation we're in, it's amazing. You can do it for free.
I don't actually have like financial independence, you know. The thing is, what happens to me is that we moved around so much for my husband's job that I didn't manage to catch up with the language. So we live like I'm from Brazil, I speak Portuguese, and then I lived in the UK. It took me 10 years to learn English, and then now I can speak in English. But it's even in English, it would be harder for me to get a job as a journalist, maybe, you know, there could be issues. But then we moved to Spain, and then France, and then Belgium, and then I didn't catch up. And then and also I had, in the meantime, 2 kids, and one of them, my younger child, is on the autism spectrum. So it's like, you know, people sometimes ask me, Andrea, how can you manage to do a work like this report, like the books that you wrote and stuff like that, and have 2 kids and stuff like that? Well, the answer is very, very simple, because my husband is like traveling around, you know, and I'm like, okay, if I want to stay with him, I have to go and stuff like that. And I have to stay a little bit longer with a child on the autism spectrum, you know. I cannot get my 14-year-old child to bring my 9-year-old home from school by themselves because of my 9-year-old, because he might not obey the 14-year-old, etc. So because I have to be there for them, and I'm happy to be there. But then, like, because of that, I don't have like a job that, you know, I get on from 9 to 5. So I have a little bit more time. Of course, I do quality time with my kids and stuff like that. It's just, you know, when women are really, really multitasking, I still am multitasking. So like when I go and put something in the oven to cook, you know, there is already like, I never start cooking before putting the clothes in the washing machine. So I have a lot of tips on that.
Andrea, is there one last thing you'd like to add?
Well, you know, use this report as much as you can. Send these to politicians, send these to schools, start talking. If you need something like a little bit more lightweight, you know, get the Grumpy Guide to Radical Feminism to talk to teenagers, like the youngest have been 13-year-olds, so to read the book. So get girls to talk about how uncomfortable they are in sharing toilets with boys, unisex toilets, how the boys are always, get everyone talking, get boys to talk, get girls to talk to friends, talk to anyone, So the Grumpy Guide is in 8 languages right now. It's in English, Portuguese, French, German, Italy, and Dutch and Greek.